An 11th hour deal to save Cyprus from financial meltdown. A bailout package is approved to keep the island nation in the Eurozone. But the country's second largest bank will close. Investors face big losses and thousands may lose their jobs. A painful reality or too high a price to pay? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. A painful decision for the people and a defeat for European solidarity. That's the assessment of Cyprus's Parliament President of the sacrifices the country is making to qualify for an international bailout. Smaller depositors have been spared this time, but there's still been a high price to pay to keep the banking system from collapsing. The European Union and the International Monetary Fund had required that Cyprus raise $7.5 billion in return for $13 billion in international loans. That to be achieved through a radical downsizing of its banking sector. Under the terms of the deal, Cyprus's second largest lender, Laiki or Popular Bank, is to be wound up. And investors with deposits of more than $130,000 risk losing up to 40% of their savings. The European Central Bank had threatened to cut off crucial emergency assistance to the banks by Tuesday if no agreement was reached. Jonah Hull is in Nicosia.
Well, there's good news and then there's rather more bad news here in Cyprus. The good news is that Cyprus has been saved. It's avoided bankruptcy and a messy exit from the Eurozone. Small-scale savers will be spared the cost of a bailout. The rich will be hit hard instead. But the bad news is they'll be made to pay in other ways and for a long time to come. Thousands of jobs will be lost immediately in the closure of Laiki Bank, and many more will go as small businesses struggle without ready access to loans. Pension funds and insurance funds will take heavy losses. They were invested, many of them, in the big banks. And of course, as Greece knows only too well just across the water from here, no bailout comes for free. The international lenders will demand the $13 billion loan be paid back somehow in the form of austerity, in the form of public spending cuts that will impact heavily on jobs, on salaries and on economic growth.
Well, that was Jonah Hull, but let's go straight to our guest, joining us from three cities at the very heart of this issue. In Nicosia, Alexander Apostolides, an economic historian at the European University Cyprus. In Berlin, Marcel Fratzer, president and CEO of the German Institute for Economic Research. And in Moscow, journalist and political analyst Dmitry Babich. Welcome, gentlemen. Alexander, finally a plan is in place. Is there anything you or the students you teach like about it?
Well, it's not a defeat and it's not a victory, and I would say it's the first plan of many, because the way, from I would guess both Eurogroup and the Cyprus government, this was handled, the damage to the economy has been so grave. We will definitely miss all our targets that were demanded by the Troika. I'll give you an example. On February and January, we had a primary surplus. That's gone. You can forget about it now. So we are really almost inevitably going for a bailout number 2, and that is what's really scaring Cypriots. What will be asked for us to do next time? And that is really undermining the whole principle of the bail-in. It was as someone has said, the operation was a success, but the patient died. It was maybe a good idea, but the way it was put into the table has created a grievous blow in the Cypriot economy.
Marcel, do you echo those thoughts? What do you think of the plan?
I think the plan is the right one. I think it was necessary. A haircut should have been done and was made. I think the plan should have been implemented a week ago, so when it was initially done. And I think this time delay has caused great damage. So I fear that the uncertainty for investors abroad and in Cyprus has now increased tremendously, with a big cost for Cyprus. So we don't know whether there will be a bank run and depositors withdraw their money. So I'm quite concerned about the short run, but the step that has been taken is the right one.
Do you think it's a good thing? Dimitri, what's the view from Russia about this?
Well, in Russia the view is very negative because first it's the first time that inside the EU people are actually losing their private property because what happened, I don't think it's a tax, it's a confiscation. Because with taxes, people are warned in advance that for this or that amount of profit they are going to pay a certain tax. When you suddenly confiscate 10 or as we hear now 30 or 40% of someone's savings, that's not a tax, that's a confiscation. So I think the loss in trust will be much greater than the financial loss which the European funds of solidarity could have carried if they bailed Cyprus out for their own money. And certainly Russia perceived what happened very negatively because there was so much talk in Germany about taxing Russian oligarchs instead of their honest German taxpayers. In a lot of people in Russia, for them it reminded them of the Bolshevist tax act when rich people are supposed to be made poor, and that's not a sin, while it's a sin to take money from the poor people. If private property is sacred, then probably no accounts should be confiscated, whether they are above 100,000 euro or below the amount of 100,000 euro.
Okay, gentlemen, you raised many points there, and that's what you think about this, your assessment. I want to show you what some in Cyprus feel about what's happened. Just take a look at these pictures. This was the result of a petrol bomb which exploded at a Bank of Cyprus branch in the coastal town of Limassol. Apparently, men wearing masks are believed to have smashed the front glass door entrance and thrown the Molotov cocktail inside. A little more muted, I dare say, but this has been the reaction on the streets of the capital, Nicosia.
The decisions that were taken were harsh. It's a catastrophe. It'll be a long time before things are right again.
It's a big shame what has happened, but with the way things were going, what else could they do? There was no other solution. God help us all.
It all happened very fast. We were listening to the discussions, but we couldn't understand it. We are not mathematicians.
But Alexander, you don't have to be a mathematician to work this out, do you? I mean, regardless of who you are in Cyprus, it's going to have a rather dramatic impact on your life.
Well, first of all, can I just say that I agree with Moscow that this is private property theft, and it's really crossing the Rubicon from the Eurogroup. And we proposed other things. We wanted to PSI our domestic debt, hurting domestic lenders, and we were refused by the Eurogroup. So let us be clear. For politics, for German elections, the idea of some sort of haircut, tax, levy, whatever you want to call it, was a must for us to get a deal. So really, if it was a good decision, we wanted to put other decisions on the table, and we were refused because there's elections in Germany.
Okay, I'm going to pick up on that point. Let me quickly throw that to Marcel.
Yeah.
Why did Germany and the rest of the EU not take another route? Why did it not accept what Cyprus had to offer?
I think first of all you have to recognize that the European Union and the IMF have done a lot. They provide a very, very big loan of 10 billion euros, so this is a big amount. They provide technical assistance to help Cyprus overcome the problem. It should be emphasized that it's not Germany. Germany alone has nothing to say in this program. It's an EU, the whole EU and the IMF program. Germany is standing very much behind Cyprus. Germany wants Cyprus to stay within the euro, but the EU as a whole is saying, Cyprus, if you want to stay in the euro, you have to take the right reforms to repair the damage that has been done. And take the right reforms. So I think these are the necessary steps. And there is a lot of support for Cyprus, but also the understanding Cyprus has to take reforms in its own hands.
Okay, I mean, Marcel, you worked for the ECB. You know that the ECB has the money to help if it wanted to.
The European Central Bank has been helping since many, many months and quarters in emergency liquidity for Cypriot banks. So it is helping, it has been helping, and it will continue to help. So there is no question about the support from the European Central Bank, in my view.
But
you're going to say something, Alexander?
I'm sorry. Yes, let's be clear. We're not asking for more money. We wanted to be able to do debt restructuring. and be able to get most of the debt is in domestic hands. So we would suffer rather than our depositors. We were refused. Let's be very clear on that. I think Moscow is right. This is theft of private property, especially from the moment that it was decided it would be across the board, because that's actually time inconsistent. So a saver who chooses a very good bank would still be haircutted as much as a saver who chooses a bad bank. And that is really completely against any precedent of the market. Whether you were a laiki bondholder or a shareholder or a depositor, you might have gotten a hit. I would understand that. That's not what it was asked from us originally. It was asked from us to take a hit across the board, even on people who put their money on good banks and they were getting a lower interest rate. We wanted to do debt restructuring, and for the sake of Italy and Spain, we were refused. So I'm not saying we were not helped by Europe. We're very thankful for Europe's help. We're very thankful for the ELA help. We're very confused why something that the Eurogroup accepted that Greece could do, and in fact that caused a 4 billion hole in our two banks, making them insolvent. The Greek PSI was completely refused in the Greek case. That is what people are very astounded in Cyprus.
And I'm sure they're very astounded in Germany as well. In Russia as well. Marcel, and you certainly did allude to it. I mean, the fact that Russia is paying for Europe's woes here.
I would say that the Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev called what happened expropriation, and I want to tell you that actually, the European press, when it reports about Russia, it concentrates on things like friends of democracy against enemies of democracy, and it failed to notice that our Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev is actually a right-wing politician. And some of the members of his cabinet are also right-wing politicians. Some of them used to be wealthy businessmen before they went into politics. So for them, it's a sort of a slap in the face, when someone in the Eurogroup decides that if a person is rich and he is Russian and he invests his or her money in a Cypriot bank, this money is somehow supposed to be dirty. That was very badly received in Russia and by the Russian government. Today there was a special discussion of that in the Prime Minister's office, and the response was that the Russian money which is kept in Cyprus, the vast majority of the accounts belong to honest people who pay taxes on this money in Russia, and it's really unfair to put a levy on these accounts, some kind of a levy that these people had no way of predicting or expecting. Okay. That was basically the reaction from the Russian government.
Okay, now many of those who stand to lose money in Cyprus are, of course, Russians. They're thought to hold up to as much as $26 billion in Cypriot banks. Emma Hayward has been gauging reaction from Moscow.
Well, this deal has prompted something of an angry response here in Moscow, with the Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev saying that the stealing continues. We wouldn't expect any other kind of reaction, really, because of what's at stake for Russian investors. There are an awful lot of them who've invested their money in Cypriot banks. Around a third of all deposits in Cypriot banks are said to be Russian in origin, so there could be heavy losses for Russian investors. Russians have been investing in Cyprus for many years, attracted by a corporate tax which stands at 10%. But there have been questions about the banking system itself, asking whether Cyprus has been used by the Russians to launder money. That has been denied by Cyprus. But I think the big question now is, what will Russians do next? Will they decide to make their own exit and take their money out of Cyprus?
Dmitry, so maybe you could answer that. What are Russians likely to do next? Will they take the money out of Cyprus? What will Putin do?
Well, as you know, the private investors, they have no way of taking their money away from Cyprus, because there were certain limitations imposed on the movement of capitals in Cyprus. So even if the owners wanted to withdraw their money, they're not going to be able to do that in near future unless they pay this levy, which is still not clear how. Yeah,
because there's an estimate that something like 15 billion could leave if you were able to get it out there.
Well, certainly what I can tell you is that there will be less Russians willing to put their money in Cypriot banks. And people will not blame Cyprus for that. I think they will blame the Eurogroup. I think it's a terrible blow for the reputation of the European Union in Russia. For many years, the European Union was presented by Russian liberals as a model. It was said that we should imitate it. And now when we see that the European Union is behaving very much like the Soviet Union in the early years of its existence, certainly it's a blow to the EU's prestige in Russia.
Marcel, what do you make of that? I mean, do you think that this is what a lot of people suspect, that Germany is getting its own back on Russia, that Russia is a target of all of this?
No, I think there's no problem or no concern about deteriorating relationship with Russia. I think the decision that the Eurogroup has taken, together with Cyprus and the IMF, has nothing to do with Russia. It could have been anyone investing in Russia. The point was, the main aim was to help Cyprus restructure its debt, have a sustainable public debt, so Cyprus could again grow in the future and have a good economic future. So this is nothing against Russia. It's purely in favor of Cyprus and helping Cyprus to overcome its problems.
Alexander, are you surprised that Russia hasn't made a counter offer now that they've seen what the EU's hand is as far as Cyprus is concerned?
First of all, I'd like to hear the ECB person you have there. Why were we refused to PSI our own debt? Because really that's the key. We didn't want to touch Russian deposits. It's very clear that Russia understands that. It's very clear from us that that was a demand. So let's be fair, if there was any other depositor, we would PSI the debt, but we did that in Greece and we got a 4 billion hit. We were not allowed to do that. Let's be very clear. So we might talk about solidarity. I mean, the biggest blow is not just to Russians who think differently in the EU. Our Eurobarometer showed 85% support in Europe and 80% support in the euro. It's dropped down to single digits overnight. So really, if this is about creating a common union, which we want, which I am a Europhile, a common currency, we basically killed the people who support it. We are turning this into a zero-sum game, and I really think that the next time a government comes, maybe in a southern country, that has a different idea that the rest of the Northern Eurogroup, and it's going to be shouted down again, that's probably the end of Europe. So really, let's be clear. People in Cyprus almost overnight have been converted to not like the dream of Europe, which they, with great sacrifice, they managed to get into. Now,
Marcel, he raises a lot of important points. Excuse me, jumping in here, Alexander. No, let me just put this to Marcel. He's raising very important points. I mean, where's the love here from Europe? I mean, where's the unity? If you've got friends like this, who needs enemies? Why target such a small player?
I think, again, you have to realize that of the 17 billion euros that have to be provided to help Cyprus, 10 billion, so about 2/3, comes from the European Union and the IMF, so the European Union, the euro area. So a big chunk of the money comes from Europe. So there is support, there is help. There is a program together with the IMF to help Cyprus overcome the problems, to restructure the banks, to get their public finances back on a sustainable track. So there is a very strong sense of solidarity in Germany and in Europe, which all countries within the euro area are treated equally. Ireland got a program, very similar lines. Portugal got equally a program. So we treat all euro area countries in a fair and even way. Again, 2/3 of the money comes from Europe, and only a small chunk, about 1/3, is coming from the Cypriot taxpayers and from foreign depositors, which, by the way, is not just Russians. It also includes German taxpayers. German depositors who have money in Cyprus are equally hit as are Russians. So it's not just an issue about Russia. All depositors in Cypriot banks are contributing, including German depositors.
Okay, now Germany has been trying to take the lead in resolving Cyprus's debt crisis, demanding that depositors bear some of the losses. Here then is what Angela Merkel said after agreement was reached.
I
believe that a fair burden distribution was achieved. On the one hand, banks have to take responsibility for themselves, which is what we have always said. We do not want taxpayers to save banks. Banks must save themselves. This is what will happen in the case of Cyprus.
Marcel, briefly, if you will, what does she mean by that banks have to look after themselves when it's clearly depositors who've been targeted here?
We have a situation in many Cypriot banks that is not sustainable. One bank has to be wound down, has to be closed. Other banks have to be reduced in size massively. So the support for the banks has to come from banks itself, means the depositors, those who have put money into the banks, as well as the owners of the banks, they have to make sure the banks are recapitalized and are put on a path that is sustainable. So that is the meaning of the help for the banks has to come from within inside, as well as through loans from the IMF and from the European Union.
And Alexander, I mean, to impose this deal, what are we looking at when the banks open on Tuesday? Are we looking at capital controls? And if we are, where does this leave the euro?
Okay, please notice that no one's answering the question why we're not allowed to restructure our debt like Greece did. And please notice that 4
let's
billion
move on
out
from
of these
that
bank
because we've got
losses.
lots of things to cover. Let's talk about capital controls.
Well, and also agreed, but 4 billion of our losses was from the Greek PSI. Well, we're hearing now that the capital controls might not be in effect. They might be only in effect for the two banks directly affected. That was the announcement that we had in news around midday. News are changing and are progressing from day to day. So it looks like eBank and Bank of Cyprus, the two banks, one is the bank that will be split to good and bad bank. The other one is the bank that will be recapitalized using this theft of deposits over 100,000. These two will stay closed, or they'll have some sort of capital controls of 10,000 euros a week, it seems. The other banks are not expected to have any capital controls, and we are expecting to open the banks tomorrow, but perhaps not in the morning, because there's also not only a large backlog of orders, there's also a lot of technical questions, when to cash what, etc.
Okay, and Dimitri, sorry, let me just pop this
100,000.
last question to Dimitri. As far as an offshore haven is concerned for the Russians, those days over? Where are you going to look? Malta now, possibly?
There are lots of opportunities for businessmen around the world, including Russians, to put their money in offshore accounts. Besides Cyprus, there are lots of other countries. There are the Cayman Islands, there are the British Virginia Islands. So there are lots of other places, and those businessmen who are indeed, somewhat dishonest, I think that most of them move their money away from Cyprus, if ever they had their money in Cyprus. In Cyprus, most of the Russian depositors are small and medium entrepreneurs. So it's going to be a blow to them. But the Russian side is unhappy about it. But I would like to add that we played our role in helping Cyprus. Just recently, Russia gave Cyprus a loan of 2.5 billion euros. So what Russia can do is to restructure that loan, and there are negotiations going on the matter. So everything will depend again on the Eurogroup and on the Cypriot government, how far they are going to go in accommodating Russian sensitivities about what happened.
Alexander, very briefly, what's Cypriots going to be doing now? Putting their money under their beds?
I think Cypriots are still far too confused. I mean, some companies will never open when the banks open because their deposits have been taken away in Laiki. Some pension funds will never be able to pay pensions again. It was really a successful bungling of maybe a good idea. The idea might have been good, but I think Cypriots will wait. I mean, we have a way of saying siga siga or yavash yavash in Turkish, which means we'll wait, we'll wait. I think people will wait and they react slowly as the banks open. I don't think we'll see that immediate rush, maybe in the first day, maybe two, but people are going to wait and see what else will be required from us.
Okay, thank you very much to my guests. In Nicosia, Alexander Spostiladis there. In Berlin, Marcel Fratzer. And in Moscow, Dmitry Babic. Thank you, of course, for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. Remember, you can find this program, many more, at aljazeera.com. Just follow the links for programs and Inside Story. Thanks again for watching. Goodbye.